I've pushed
Yeah.
for a bit that I think it should be a whole new name because this looks like a new library to me. Welcome, welcome. So excited for today's show. I'm sure almost everybody here already knows what we're talking about and hopefully knows who we're talking to. But for those who don't, mind introducing yourself quick?
Yeah, I'm Alex. I'm the creator of tRPC and been a web developer for a really, really long time. We can keep it at that. Very short and simple for now.
Sounds good to me. I am sure a lot of people here know of you, but don't know too much about you. I know you want to keep it simple, but I think there is some value in talking about your history a bit and how you got to tRPC. Mind telling us a bit about like how you got started with web development, what you liked and didn't like, and how that kind of led us to GraphQL and eventually tRPC?
So I started off in web development in PHP, and that was over 15 years ago. And what I really loved about PHP is like, you can have an index.php file and you can make everything just work with one file. You can write database calls and then render stuff in HTML straight from the database, and you have this like really amazing productivity. And that's something when you look at tRPC, you'll see that there's a lot of influence there of how the productivity you can have of just using the same language and leveraging that. But my career has been like a bit all over the place. I worked as an iOS developer, as worked as an Android developer, front end, back end developer in a bunch of different languages. And what led me to create tRPC is sort of also a bit of a zigzag thing. I started a company, was it like 3 years ago? And I really loved GraphQL, and I've used that in production for several years ahead of that. So I was sure I wanted to do a GraphQL backend. But I also wanted to move fast, and I didn't want to write a GraphQL backend from scratch. And Prisma 2 was still in beta, so I ended up using Hasura for the backend. And Hasura for me is a project. How I usually put it is like it makes things that are already easy even easier, and it makes things that are naturally hard, like writing your own business logic, doing good continuous integration, testing, whatnot, a lot harder. And I didn't think that struck the right balance. And I got to the point where like, hey, I need to write my own backend, not using a backend as a service tool. And I was close to writing my own GraphQL server. But at the end of the day, it was like, I'm just making a website here. Why do I need this like big and complicated API? Back in the days, I would just write this whole fucking thing in an index.php file. And I started looking for solutions, and there was nothing really out there that solved this itch that I was having. And I found an early proof of concept of what was called tRPC that quickly changed into something that was just 100% Alex, and just fell in love with that idea and spent a lot of nights, weekends, and days on doing the first version of tRPC, which is now on version 9, although it should really be like version 1. We're going to talk about version 10 now. That should actually be called version 2, but I've been really diligent about breaking changes. So even when I change like a type definition that is exported, I do a major version change. Def major of tRPC was released in September last year. And today we're going to talk about tRPC version 10, which is going to be the first breaking change for almost a year now.
I couldn't be more excited. I am so hyped for tRPC v10. As somebody in chat just pointed out, this is kind of v2 in binary. 10 is 2 in binary. So we can call this v2. I've pushed
Yeah.
for a bit that I think it should be a whole new name, honestly, because this is the stuff that I've seen at least looks like a new library to me.
Yeah. And I've considered changing the name, but it also coincided, like I worked on this sort of implementation of tRPC for 6 months or so on like nights and weekends, right? Because I have a day job too. And I considered changing name, but when I talk to like core users of tRPC that's been on the journey for a long time, they sort of like the name and the familiarity, and it's gotten so much traction lately that it would sort of be it would be a shame to change the name to something new, because now it's a thing, right? Now it's a sort of like established name out there. It's in people's mouths, like tRPC, GraphQL, REST.
Mostly agree. I think that due to the level of hype, there is a unique opportunity to funnel that into something big, to really like emphasize how crazy a new launch and honestly new product that you're shipping here. But with that all said, I think it's easier to show than tell. I'm going to do something I don't do a lot on stream. I'm going to try and do a screen share with a guest. So we could go to the playground, or we can show just the way things are different now. What would you like us to do?
I haven't tried the playground for a few days. You don't know if it works, but that's actually the best place to look. Like, I would assume that most people on the stream are already familiar with tRPC, since you talk so much about it.
Enough aren't that we might want to give a very brief overview. There are 700 people watching right now across platforms. I'm sure a handful of them don't know what tRPC is. So should we give a quick intro on what it is?
Yeah, sure. Like, tRPC eliminates the need of having API schemas. Like, traditionally, if you want any sort of like typed guaranteed shape between your backend and the front end, you would use something like OpenAPI or GraphQL. And tRPC removes the need of that by allowing you to reuse the type information that you have on your backend and your front end. What that means in layman's terms is just like you define a function in your backend, and then you can call it on your front end. And the same way you can return just data from a function on your backend normally and just call it internally, you can do that, but across the wire.
Yep, I can confirm that's exactly how it feels to use tRPC. You write a function on your backend, and then you call it on your front end, and the only difference between the two is the file you're writing them in. It is such a seamless experience, and I've had a lot of fun working with it, which is why I'm even more excited about what's changing. How would you two-sentence to your best ability the change from V9 to V10? Like, what is the higher level goal that you are seeking out with the new design?
So removing the barriers between front end and back end even more. So right now, you on the front end sort of invoke a function, and with the new version, it will really, really feel like you're calling a function that is part of the same system. And you can do stuff like refactoring straight from the front end. You can like change the name of an API endpoint by just like right-clicking the function in your front end, and it will change in your backend as well. And all of this happens without having any like extra compile steps. It's still just using TypeScript. You don't need to think about any weird ass Webpack config or anything like that. You just call a function, and that is through a proxy object rather than these like string paths.
For those that don't know what a proxy object is, want to quickly describe what's happening here? Because it is so interesting.
Okay. When you have a proxy in JavaScript, you can wrap a function, and then when you access different parts of that object, you can actually remap that dynamically to different places. So what all that this does, when you call proxy.greeting.greeting, which is a weird endpoint name, it will actually just remap that into a string. And when the actual function call is called at the end, something else happens. So it will actually call a client.query, and it will use those first parts of that of this like stepping through the object and pass that as a string to the backend. But as a consumer, it feels like you're just accessing a D property. But thanks to the proxy object, you can do this dynamically on the front end without needing any actual runtime information about the backend.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense at all?
It does to me, but that's also because I've been thinking about this a lot. The way I want to describe the change for those who are currently familiar with tRPC, if I go back to the homepage, you'll see when you do a query, you're writing a string. There's effectively a list of strings that are predetermined as valid tRPC endpoints based on the query keys and the mutation keys you define in your router. Now we're moving away from those strings towards an object with a shape. and that object shape is what determines your API. It's almost like GraphQL in that way, with a GraphQL like nested schema, but instead of it being a separate world, a whole separate language of GraphQL that we then have to like translate on both sides, it is the object in in TypeScript that describes the API and how it's fulfilled on the back end, as well as how we query against it on the front end, but without a different thing doing that translation.
Yeah. And at runtime, the client doesn't actually have any knowledge whatsoever about how the backend looks like. The client is completely dumb, and there's no extra runtime information sent to the client. It's just the compiler that knows sort of what the backend can do, and that is the whole magic of it. Like at the end of the day, you still get this same string as you had before, but the DX is a bit smoother, and it sort of bridges the gap a bit more than the current version.
So I just changed from greeting to message to see if we will get an error on this side now. And look at that. We do. Greeting's not a valid endpoint. Message is. But here's where I think some of the craziest magic of what you've built here is. If I right click and go to definition on this function, which to be clear, this is front end code. This could be a hook right here, like tRPC dot query or use query dot message. And when you right click, go to definition, it brings you to the backend code from the front end code.
Yeah. And that is like one of the biggest changes with the new version is, it bridges the gap. Like it's just a seamless experience if you work on the back end or front end, doesn't matter. You can just like go to definition on both ends.
Somebody was asking for this link, so I'm just going to share it in chat quick. So they have that.
And there's, now that we mention it, there is actually, if you want to dive into the React world, there is actually a starter with the new version that I'm going to send to you. I'll send it. Is it Discord best or in the
Twitch
chat?
chat's probably the easiest, actually. Others will have the link if that's okay.
I sent it on the ping chat. That one we can play with a bit.
Cool. I will grab that from in here.
Yeah.
Should I just clone it?
I think it's best to just like get it on your computer. And it doesn't use any Postgres or whatnot. It just uses SQLite, so it should be just yarn dev, I think. I'll double check that for you. Yeah, yarn dev will also do the migration necessary to get it running.
Since I never use yarn, I don't have any yarn things cached.
Oh yeah, I mean it will work with whatever you're using as well.
You don't even have a lock file in it.
No, because this is sort of like just a folder in the tRPC repo that is pushed downstream to another branch. So the mother repo has the actual log file.
That's fair.
So in the meantime, maybe we can ask answer some questions on Slack. Okay, cool. Someone asked if there will be Svelte support, and like tRPC is agnostic to React. So tRPC is built on 4 different packages right now that are official. There's the server, which will be able to run on Dino or Node or Bun. And there's the client that doesn't have any dependencies whatsoever. And then there's the React library that you can use if you want to, which has dependency on React Query and React. But tRPC will work in Vue, Svelte, Solid, Angular, God forbid, and anything else.
I'm getting distracted by the question you asked in the comment here, so I'm going to do my best to not get distracted by that and instead just show how cool this is. So there's a tRPC router. Probably the easiest way is to go here, where we have, oh no, that's going to a setup function. Interesting. One layer too low,
Click
probably.
the tRPC maybe.
Here we go. Here's the app router. So here we have the app router. It has a post router and a health router as sub routers. We can go to the definitions of these and we'll see that post router is a router. It has a list, which is a t.procedure.query, which is assuming a tRPC helper to create a query, and by ID, which is a procedure with input and one query. So you put the input outside of the query. It looks like you define this first and then the query.
Yeah. So the big change here for people familiar with tRPC is that instead of chaining the router, where you have like a big router object where you gradually add stuff by adding a new like chain on the router, you instead have a flat router object, and then you have procedures that are smart, and the procedures can be chained and reused, so you can add middlewares straight on the procedure rather than the router itself, and then you can reuse those afterwards. But we can get into like middlewares and more advanced stuff a bit later, I guess. We can start with the basics of just like define a query, define a mutation, calling that, etc.
Works for me. Yeah, there's so much here that's interesting. It's hard for me to not rabbit hole on the pieces I'm curious about and give just the overview.
And I'm also very open for feedback still. Like this is still sort of like a private alpha. Whoever just like responded to a tweet to me, I've given them feedback, and now I guess like 600 people on this stream. But I'm still open for API changes and whatnot. If people have ideas on how we can improve things, I'm really, really glad to receive feedback.
Well, we did just get a question that I believe was one of the core things that this new architecture addresses. I'd love for you to chat a bit about. Is V10 going to fix the scaling issues? I'm assuming that what that chatter is referring to specifically is when you have a large number of tRPC endpoints in one tRPC router, how that affects your TypeScript compile times.
Yeah. So the new version is going to make it like, fixing it. It's a TypeScript problem. They have a slow compiler that often crashes. However, the new way we're approaching tRPC makes it a lot easier for the compiler, but there's still a lot of inference and stuff like that, which I can't really avoid if I want to do a great developer experience. That said, you can do probably like 10 times the backend, 10 times the size of the backends before you start encountering those problems. And when you encounter those problems, there are ways to solve those that are a bit more, straightforward than the current version. So when you do a large scale TypeScript project, the TypeScript official performance documentation tells you to do a lot of things. Tells you to not do a lot of things that we rely on in tRPC, which is don't rely too much on inference and do stuff like everything that is fun about TypeScript basically tell you not to do. So when we abuse those things, as we do in tRPC, at a certain point, you will have to do some optimizations on your own. And that includes writing a few different TS configs across your project in order to let TypeScript compile certain types of your app independently. But the short answer for this is yes, the scaling problems are solved for the 95% use case.
Couldn't be more excited to hear that. I have been in hell with project references myself. Back at Twitch, we had a very slow, very big TypeScript code base that ran into a lot of these same issues. And even if you work around inference and write all your types out manually and do all the things the way the docs say, there is still a size where you run into those problems. I think that knowing how to solve those problems is more valuable than a library slightly extending the runway you have until you run into them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And at a certain scale, you'll have to learn those things. That's just the nature of the beast.
Totally makes sense.
But should we talk a bit about how you define maybe a router, how you define a procedure, how you define a sub-router,
Let's
some
do it.
basic stuff like that?
Let's make a new router. I will
Yeah,
hop into, where are we defining this router right now?
it's the same structure as you might be familiar with.
Cool. So I want to make the new router inline because I'm lazy.
Yeah.
Const, I can't type. New router equals.
Yeah.
And in here, I'll look at the post router for reference.
Yeah.
The T router. Oh, you literally just put the keys for the things you wanted in it.
Yeah.
So message T dot.
I love Copilot. Perfect.
I will name it test. New router. And let's see how easy it is to query this on the client. Const test query equals tRPC dot
Proxy for now.
Dot.
We're probably going to get rid of that proxy thing because it's just an abstraction leak. Should just be tRPC dot.
Makes sense. Dot
Test dot
message
no, you should
dot use query. And now test query is a type safe result. Dot data. If we hover over this, it should be string or undefined because we might not have data yet because this might still be in a loading state or error state or something along those lines.
Yeah.
That was
you
hilariously
can
easy.
command click, and you can command click that message and jump back in. Not there exactly.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect there.
You'll have to learn it.
Yeah, this is what you mean. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So for everyone else here, this is React front-end code. This is the usual JavaScript you write. The one weird thing is the use query that you call is a sub key on a pretty deeply nested object. But the magic that we get from this is I can right-click message, go to definition, and it brings me to the backend code for that function. Theoretically, I'd even be able to right-click, rename symbol, test rename, and that should have, change it on the back end too. From your front end, you can full stack refactor an API name by right-click, rename symbol. That is insane. You're just smiling.
Really nice. No, I'm happy. Like it's really fun to like see people's reactions to this, right? Like I've been working a lot on this for like the last 6 months. Like it's been going back and forth, and this is sort of the conclusion right now. But there might be tweaks we can do. Like you might not like that .use query that you have to write in the end, but you might also understand why that's needed.
Yep, it's growing on me. I was unsure at first, but it's definitely growing on me. One thing I'll give for some feedback, just because I'm in here and I've been thinking about this since I saw it. Is there a real use case for more than one tRPC React query context? Or can we pretty safely infer that you have just one?
We're actually adding so you can have several because it's a use case that some people want, that they can create several context, several tRPC contexts, because some of them have several independent tRPC APIs they're working with at the same time. So we're going to make, like, until now, it's always been one global context that you always use, but it's going to change.
So I would assume in that case that you'd have like a different tRPC object that you're importing, depending on which API.
Yeah.
So here's my proposal. Dot invalidate.
Yeah. That's actually the proposal we're working towards. I can send you the RFC where we're talking about that. Let me see proxy, because that's actually what we have landed on. So I'll send you here. It's very close to what you're saying. You can open that if you want.
Where did you send that?
Yeah, there's
yeah.
2-minute channels. I sent it here on the ping chat.
I'll send it on the stream chat so everyone else can have it too,
Oh, yeah.
and so I can get to it a little more easily.
Yeah. I'll send the next messages there instead.
Perfect. Cool. So, create proxy methods for React queries, use context. Oh, you're already doing this. Okay, so what I was thinking is a little different. Rather than having to use context off the proxy directly, theoretically, and like depending on how this is all defined, I could just be talking on my ass and entirely wrong here. The context doesn't have to live inside of React, and you can operate on it out of band relatively trivially. What I was imagining is that the instantiation of the tRPC React helper would have an out of React binding to the context, such that just by importing tRPC or wherever like the React side is, I don't have to do any of the hook side at all. I literally just from importing tRPC am out of band invalidating. But that is like React query smart enough to let you trigger that update out of band and then re-render inside of React.
I'm not sure. I assume that breaks the rules of hooks, and that would also break the rules of React query. But React query doesn't work by the usual rules of hooks, right? So it might work. Not sure.
I think that rules of hooks are mostly meant to apply when you're inside of React. And once you've made a hook, especially once you've made like a custom hook, there's a bit of an assumption there that you have hooked into React's lifecycle. And if you choose to operate on that from outside of React through like using external store and other methods, that's fine. And I don't necessarily think that having a function here that globally-ish triggers a change that then causes a React change without having a hook that attaches to that initially is that big a deal. I do so much stuff like this in Ping, it's not even funny.
Okay, fair enough. I saw Sachin was in the chat. He's one of the core contributors on tRPC. I hope he's listening.
Yeah, more than happy to pull in Tanner as well as TK in the future too, if you want to have more of the like React query side of people giving their thoughts on this too, because I could just be entirely wrong.
Yeah. I mean, the way I approach these things is just like I test it out. If it works, I assume it's good until proven otherwise.
That's the right way to do it. Cool. There's so many other pieces I really want to dive in on. I want to check out the middleware stuff in particular. As you know, a use case I have had a lot is instead of new router, let's say admin router. So on this router, I want to check if a user's ID has admin : in the front. Fail if they don't, and if they do, from that point, process the request.
Okay, so let's. So what we want to do then is that. Do you want to do several procedures that have this rule, or just one?
I want this router, ideally, to have the rule such that every procedure within it will only be hittable if the rule is passed.
So it's slightly different. The way you think about this instead is that you have an admin router, and then every procedure in that router uses a middleware by making a very reusable middleware. So you want to create an admin middleware, an admin procedure that you can use. So we can do an admin procedure, and then that is t.procedure.use.
.use.
Yeah. And then here we have access to the context. This is a callback function. And in that context,
I have to
so
like
this works.
yoink it out of this.
Yeah, let's. This is quite small
There we
for
go.
me. Yeah, exactly. And
Why is
this
that
is
not happy?
based on your context object, right? So go to the context.ts and let's make an imaginary user on that.
I don't know why this is so mad at me right now. You can't quite see the error because of our faces covering it. It's void is not assignable.
Oh yeah. Okay, you have to return next on this. Similar to the existing middlewares, you have to return next at the end, and next is also something you destruct from the parameters here. So return next, and then it's gonna it's gonna stop complaining. And then the context object here, similar to the context wrapping that we have in the current version, you can call next with a context that is different from the current one. So you can.
Interesting.
So you can do like if context.user.
Funny that it's that smart.
Yeah, and then you can do throw error. Oh wow, that's really smart.
But we don't have user on this type. How would we earlier in the chain add? Actually, what's on this by default? Nothing. Cool. How would we add things to the chain earlier then?
So the context object in tRPC in V10 is exactly the same as the context object of V9. It's created once per request. So in your context.ts in this project, you will have the context object being set up. So this is based on the incoming request. It's just split out in two different functions, so it's easier to test. But in your create context inner, let's just do pretend.
Yeah, I'll just do a fake one.
We can.
So in here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And theoretically, I should now have user with ID.
Yeah.
Cool. Then this will throw. Otherwise, we will pass. So now in the admin router, I would want to chain this in front of each query, right?
Yeah, so instead of doing t.procedure, you use admin procedure. And now that's secure.
Okay. Okay.
And you can reuse that several times.
And I'll have, like, if I add something else into here, status.
Context.
Okay. Do I need to put this in a context?
Yeah. So context adds. That's a tiny little change is that context you don't have to spread anymore. It will always just add whatever you add on that. So in that context, you will have.
That's really cool.
And then you can also do reusable middlewares. Like if you want to do, if you want to abstract this admin procedure middleware that you now did in line here as use, you can instead do, if you define a new variable in the line above, you can or below, you can do const admin middleware.
Admin middleware, you said?
Yeah. And then you can do t.middleware instead of tprocedure.use.
And instead here, I would t.procedure.use that guy.
Yeah, exactly. And that would be exactly the same thing.
And that should still give us, user info, context dot user.
Oh, it doesn't.
Interesting. It's not keeping the status.
Okay.
Prettier's mad. Oh, no, it is. It was just being
It does,
dumb.
yeah.
Cool. That's so rad. And if I change this to something else, type error because that middleware comes through that way. Oh,
Yeah.
that's so cool.
So in this way, you can also do like, usually now in your context, the user is not nullable, but similar to that, like some of the requests might not have user. So if user would be non-nullable and you would pass it through after doing this assertion that user exists, that would also be propagated to each procedure.
Very interesting. Yeah. So like to quickly give an example of that, I'll make user. What's the easiest way to make user
Yeah,
optional?
exactly. So
as user,
I mean, define the
or
user
null.
objects. Yeah.
Cool. Now
Yeah,
that could be
that's
null,
cool.
right?
Yeah.
Is it not smart enough
And
to actually or null it? Huh. It's just assuming that exists.
yeah, it should give a type error there.
Wonder if the or null is being destroyed somewhere else up that chain.
Yeah. But maybe we don't need to get stuck in that. That should be user or undefined.
I'm gonna or empty object
It's true.
or user
Yeah.
null. Cool. That did it.
Yeah, exactly. So now you need to do
A check here.
knowledge.
So
What's it called?
what I'm gonna do actually, let's chain these a bit. Const auth middleware or auth
Now
procedure.
you're really testing the waters.
Would it be? Can you stack middlewares?
Yeah, you can.
Const,
You should.
You shouldn't.
You should be able to. No, you should be able to. But this is a demo, so these things always make me nervous, right? I have tests for it.
If no context.user, turn next user or
Context.user.
and now we'll know theoretically expected whatever. Oh, well, I guess it's not
It has
smart
to
enough
be
to do
the
this.
tRPC error code unauthorized.
Forbidden.
Yeah.
So now how would I chain this here?
So that's a very advanced feature that I'm probably going to throw out the door because it's usually not useful. But we have a function called unstable concat, but it has some type. So if you don't do this, if you don't do the admin middleware as a reusable one, you can do it easily, similar to you did before. Then you can just do like admin procedure, and you can use that middleware and then use another middleware. But stacking two middlewares that changes the same sort of key is a bit more tricky.
I'll give the first example just so people can see it because it'll be more useful to potential users in the future. So const auth or auth admin procedure equals t dot procedure dot use auth middleware dot use, and now I can yoink the contents of this guy. And theoretically, since we asserted prior, this should now be type safe because user has to exist because in the auth middleware, we throw if it doesn't, and then we assert from here that it does. So now we have the ability to create a procedure with auth such that if we chain additional middlewares, we still have this knowing it exists, whereas here we aren't certain.
Yeah.
Cool. Now that we've seen the right way to do it, I want to try this unstable thing.
Okay. So I haven't deleted it yet, have I? I think I intended to because I didn't want people to use it. There should be t.unstable.
There's It's
See
T
if there's
dot, and the only options are config, merge, middleware,
Okay,
procedure, and
cool.
router.
I forgot about that, but I actually
Already
removed
removed
it
it?
already.
Totally fine.
Yeah,
I personally
because
have a lot of use cases for stacking middleware in dumb ways, but
fair.
I think that the procedure abstraction is probably the right place to do that. Because I don't have many use cases where I'm hot swapping different middlewares in
Yeah,
different places, but I do have a lot of places where I reuse our auth middleware all over the place, and being able to
yeah,
stack that into an admin middleware could be useful, but doing that stacking in the form of an admin procedure, that's fine.
yeah. All right. So now we know how to define. Uh, we know how to define a router. We know how to define a procedure. We know how to define middleware. What else is there? What else do you want to know?
You're the creator, man. What have we not touched on yet that we should know more about?
I mean, we haven't touched on mutations, and then you have infinite queries and stuff like that too. But we can do mutations maybe. They're very similar to what you did here with query. The only difference is that you end the procedure on your server that it's going to be a mutation instead of a query.
Interesting that procedure is used for both. It feels more
Yeah,
like, since the high level primitive that's being like reused and built around is procedure instead of router, it almost feels like the control flow has been inverted, and
yeah,
procedure is the new base unit. And from that base
yeah,
unit, you can extend a mutation or a query. You can extend a like middleware like within it, and then you could stack those into a router, nest them, do
yeah.
all these other crazy things with it.
Yeah, it just ended up being a lot more simple. At the end of the day, in tRPC v9, all of the logic that you did, like you did all this middleware shit on the router, at the end of the day, they all got stacked into this like massive procedure object. So now instead of having that on the router, we just have it on the procedures, and it makes it so it's a lot more flexible than the current version. Like you couldn't do stuff like reusable middlewares before, uh, except for like if you want to do some really really like hardcore TypeScript generics, you couldn't really do reusable middleware. Uh, but there are some other stuff I could show you where like. But yeah, let's do some more basics first. Let's create a mutation.
I can add one to the router I was hacking on in here. Let me
Yeah,
delete all of these that are no longer type safe and switch to auth admin procedure here. Cool. So now that we have a t.router, our admin router, where we're creating auth admin procedures, let's create a mutation. Delete user, we'll call it.
yeah.
Dot input.
Oh yeah,
And
you did
this,
never added a. You actually never added an input on the query. Maybe we should do that first.
putting it here is the same difference though, isn't it?
Yeah, but how you call the use query function, depending on you have an input or not, is a bit different.
That's fair,
So
actually.
maybe try to add an input there, and if you can do them side by side, like the front and the back end, so you can see like the type error is propagating through.
Cool. I don't have Zod. Isn't import star
Hmm?
as
No, that looks right.
okay?
Might be something else.
Does it not? Oh, it needs the object probably.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
Cool. And you said this
And now
changes now. Do I?
you now you have an input there, right?
Yep. And this should be the same type safe ID string that's coming from the infer off of the z.object there. And if I go to the front end where we weren't calling this yet, wait, no, we are calling it.
It should get a type error there. Wait, this is the admin router.
Oh yeah,
We're not
this is the
calling
admin
that.
router, not the test router. Cool. We'll
Phew.
switch that
Thought you found a
over.
bug.
I'll also rename it admin router. No, is the function named? It was still test rename. Cool. And this use query type errors because it expects that. Nice. Where do I put my options? Just comma options.
Yeah, yeah, that's the options. And I'm probably going to tweak this a bit because you have previously complained a bit that it's a bit hard to know what is tRPC options and what is React query options.
Yes.
And I think that would be a really good distinction to do. So maybe all of the tRPC options should maybe be under a property called tRPC or something like that, in order to make it like really clear that look at the React query docs for this or look at the tRPC docs for this.
Yes.
The only thing we really add is we add the context and we add SSR on this.
Maybe it's not worth breaking tRPC options out separate, rather breaking React query options out separate. Maybe like query client. And this is where you dump all the React query stuff, and then SSR and the other option you have that are tRPC. Those are at the top level next to React query options, and then that is where you go deeper for RQ stuff.
This is always a hard balance, right? Because like for me, who know what I'm looking for, it makes so much more sense to just have them flat because it's a nicer user experience or developer experience. But I understand that it's not perfectly clear for people coming in what is what. So it's always a hard balance there, like between like, I don't know, like new users and people that are a bit more experienced with the tools.
The TypeScript Calvary has arrived. We now have Matt in chat.
Oh, wow. Nice to see him here.
I wish he was here for the rant about how TypeScript says to not do inference. Want to repeat that one quick so Matt can share his thoughts in chat?
Yeah. Like everything we do with TypeScript that we think that is fun and makes the developer experience good is the things that the TypeScript performance docs tells us not to do, which is a shame. When you do a library like tRPC that is heavily based on inference, and people start getting like this, maximum call stack exceeded and stuff like that, and you want to advise people on that, or the TypeScript server crashing, or it just like costs everything as any all of a sudden. And TypeScript, I like that take. TypeScript performance doesn't matter when it's rewritten in Rust. Hopefully that will happen. But I mean, I'm not too optimistic about TypeScript compiler going to be rewritten in any other language and just work. How are you feeling about that, Theo?
About the TypeScript rewrite in another language?
Yeah, I've
It's
seen
not
like
happening.
I'm gonna do it to C++. I'm gonna do it in Rust. I'm gonna do it in Go.
Not happening. I've talked to too many people much smarter than I, and at least as smart as those claiming they can rewrite the TypeScript compiler in something else. I actually have a running bet right now. Some dude said he'd get it done by end of year. I think I put $5,000 down, saying like, you won't, but if you do, I'll move the code base. And if I can compile the ping code base in your C++ or whatever other native language based TypeScript compiler, immediately paying you $5,000 and moving our code base over. I need it that badly. Like, if I can compile my TypeScript code with type safety that fast, fuck yeah. The problem is TypeScript is the most JavaScripty bullshit thing ever made that doesn't only use but embraces all of the weirdest behaviors in TypeScript or in JavaScript. So encoding those, describing that AST, and doing all the things necessary to succeed in recreating the TypeScript compiler outside of JavaScript feels nigh impossible. If you picked a good subset, you could totally do it. But yeah.
100%. And I think that's the difference between what's that other one called? That's Facebook with Reason. That is similar-ish language TypeScript, but it doesn't have all of the baggage of JavaScript. it can do stuff a lot more, I mean, performant. But the problem with that is like the adoption is going to be a lot slower, because then it's not just like a strict superset of JavaScript, right? That's why
Yep.
TypeScript wins.
Mhm.
Someone asked a good question. Capex127 asked, at how many endpoints can one limit? How many endpoints can you have, I guess, is the question. And right now I have a unit test that runs with everything that has 2,000 procedures with input arguments as part of the build, and that works. And when I play with that in Jest, I get a feedback loop, which is roughly like 2-3 seconds on my machine, which is pretty promising. But that's still like a very simple example. It has a few like subrouters, and in total, it's like 2,000 procedures in a few nested levels. But still, I don't want to overpromise, but that works really well. And in a real world application, when you have all of your own application logic and inference magic, it might be a different limit, right? But I know comfortably that it works at 2,000 procedures, and it's an okay feedback loop for a simple case. And the current version of tRPC v9 goes haywire at like 500-600.
That's super
So that's
exciting.
promising.
One other question, like related to that, something I was playing with a while back was first off splitting my tRPC router out in a mono repo. So that was compiled and like cached and managed separately from the rest of my code base. But what I'm seeing with the
Yeah.
procedure stuff is a real opportunity to abstract like a level or two deeper, where you could actually
Yeah.
have a like 5 different like sub repos that export a router or export just a procedure or a few middlewares, and then in other packages import those and create like your own package hierarchy that becomes your tRPC router.
Yeah. And that's part of the things that the new way of doing things makes a lot more simple. And also it enables stuff like, if we ever want to do file-based routing that is like automatic, similar to the pages in Next, the new model of tRPC translates a lot easier to that. So maybe you want to do a file that just have export default t.router or t. Procedure, and that automatically maps to something, and that's going to be a lot more like natural with the new version. So that'd be cool. Maybe I should talk to your T3 stack guys about that to do a proof of concept. I'm sure there's some people that would be more than capable of throwing something together there.
Yeah, I need a tRPC turbo repo mono repo example with a working expo app so badly. I have went
Yeah,
ham trying to make this happen and just get pissed off every time I try, and the sooner I can not do that, the better.
I've raised an issue with a bounty, so if someone on the stream wants to pick it up, go nuts.
I see Matt saying he's interested. Apparently he's been diving into turbo repo recently, so that's exciting.
So there is a bunch of monorepo examples already, but not particularly like specifically with turbo repo and expo. That should be manageable, right? Like if I had a day where I wouldn't spend on other stuff, I would do it. Like it's just far down my priority list. All I can do right now is just outline what I sort of want to see, and then maybe someone else can pick it up.
Somebody in chat mentioned that they're upgrading Zart to V10, so that's exciting. Zart's one of my
Oh yeah,
favorite.
yeah, yeah. Omar is looking at that. Uh, yeah, shout out to Zomars. He
One
works at
person in
KATT.com.
chat said that tRPC.io is down for them, and somebody else just said that T3.gg is down, which means that Vercel's CDN
No,
is down.
it's not down. I
Is
just checked.
you're on Vercel for the tRPC site, right?
Wait, alpha.trpc.io doesn't seem to work right now. That's
I
funny.
think
But
that Vercel's
trpc.io, that
DNS
works.
might be dead, or DNS in general right now.
Maybe we overloaded Vercel. That'd be insane.
Yeah, a bunch of people are saying that they're down for them, but others are saying it's fine. I'm really thinking that there's some DNS shit going on.
Yeah, alpha.tRPC is down for me, but tRPC.io works. All right.
Well, while we're tangenting to less important things like the internet being down, I did happen to notice that there's over 230 viewers on YouTube and only 76 likes on the stream. Y'all bots? No, go fix that. Get on that, guys.
All
Anyways,
right.
this is super exciting stuff. Do you want to go over the post and the migration stuff? I think that could be useful to a lot of people since I'm sure a ton of the folks here are users.
Yeah, exactly. So people might be worried about, oh yeah, I'm using tRPC 9. What the fuck is this? This looks completely different. Is this gonna force me to rewrite my whole app in one go? And that's not the case. There is an interoperability mode. It's in the bottom in that table of contents. So there is interop mode. Interop, yeah. So here's like the beginnings of a migration guide of how you start working with tRPC v10 if you have an existing tRPC app. The only thing you need to do in the 99% use case when you use tRPC is that you upgrade to v10 and you add a .interop at the end of your current router, and then your app should work exactly the same as it does now.
Insanity. This is having done some not this great migration stories in my life. This is almost like meme tier. Just add .interop, then you can combine the routers and you're done. Merge the legacy interop router with your new one.
Yeah. So originally I planned to do v10 as like completely breaking change, renaming the project to something else, and be like, yo, if you want to change to the new thing, just like start migrating stuff over. However, I found it very helpful. Someone brought up the like interop mode as an idea, and then I started playing with it, and I realized like underneath it all, like it looks very different on the surface, but the underlying logic of middlewares and procedures and whatnot is 99% the same thing. So I started playing with an interop mode, and it was actually really useful because that means that with all the test suite of tRPC, with all the fucking weird edge cases and whatnot, I can just add .interop on my whole test suite and make it run and get pretty good confidence that everything works the same. On all my example projects that I have on tRPC, I have like 6-7 different example projects that also run through CI. I could just move them into an interoperability folder, add .interop on all of them, and then sort of get a somewhat guarantee that it just works to upgrade. So it actually saved me a bunch of time because I didn't have to rewrite, 100% of the test suite of tRPC.
That is a benefit I hadn't thought of before you mentioned it now. It makes a ton of sense. I was kind of expecting a big breaking change when you showed me the new API initially, and knowing that I can adopt it as soon as the version's released is pretty nuts. I'm really hyped about this.
You can adopt it now.
That's scary.
I mean, it's running. I tried the interop mode on my company's site, and we have pretty extensive like end-to-end test and integration test and whatnot. And I updated to the new alpha, ran the test suite, and Playwright just says like, okay, it works.
Yeah, I'm happy that you have the test so that I don't have to, but we don't. So adopting this right now is a little scary. I'm still very down and probably am going to. Excited. That said, there is a really good question from Matt. How integrated is tRPC with what you're doing in your day job?
I use tRPC every day. That's the main thing, right? So a lot of the real production use cases for tRPC and like all the weird edge cases, the need for reusability in middlewares and be able to do like a large scale backend is lessons I learn on my day-to-day job. And I currently don't spend working time working on tRPC. That is something I'm discussing now with my employer on how that would look like, where it could be like mutually beneficial for myself and the company to use tRPC. Because obviously, like for me and for the company, like contributors to tRPC becomes like a massive pool of talent, and having a big open source project out there where I can do marketing both tRPC and the company is also like a really good pool of talent we can use. Does that answer the question?
I think that more than answers it. I see a bunch of people asking what the company is. I don't know how much that's been shared just yet.
Yeah. So I can't talk too much about it publicly right now. We're still sort of pre-launch, but as much as I can say is like it's a fintech company that was in the same Y Combinator batch as Theo, and I was employee number 2. Started in January, and I started in January, and now we're 10 people, and we are working on making it easier for small and medium-sized businesses to pay and get paid.
Really good stuff. And I see how the focus on small to medium sized business makes a lot of sense for tRPC in particular. I see one more question that we've gotten enough times. I want to squash it out, and then I want to pivot over to the GraphQL conversation that's more than overdue.
Oh, cool.
But this last question, I've seen it a bunch of different ways, and some people are asking it in what about multi-part forms? Others are asking in what about file upload? What are your thoughts on supporting files in tRPC?
It's gonna happen. The question is like when. So right now, tRPC is written in a way where we only support JSON as the transport mode, but I want to open that up. So there's an issue that is outlined where we want to support more content types than JSON. And there's no limitation really. Like it's pretty well separated on the server where we should be able to add a new content type. We've already added different transport types, right? Like we have subscriptions and over WebSockets, and we have queries and mutations over HTTP, but you can do it also with WebSockets too. And the same way as we have different transport types, we also want to add other content types. So we want to be able to support a binary format that is more performant for sending, images and whatever you want to upload and stream that to your procedures instead. So that's going to happen. But for now, when you deal with images and file uploads and stuff like that, you can either do like a mutation in tRPC that returns an S3 pre-signed URL that you then upload to, or you can do everything as a base64 blob. That's what we use ourselves. So like if file handling isn't your like main core business, if you just like want to upload a profile image here and there, it doesn't really matter if you use base64 for that, and it takes twice the length when it's a request you do once a month that takes 500 milliseconds instead of 200. So the way we deal with it is like we base64 all file uploads and send that up to mutation.
Interesting. That was not quite the answer I expected. I've always viewed tRPC as the best way to pass JSON to and from your server, and it's a great way to send a pre-signed URL from your server to your client to then put the file somewhere where it belongs. I am relatively against like doing object manip and like managing files in your servers unless that's like your business. Like if you can use S3 or you can use something else, there's any option to not roll your own, you should take that option.
But it's a lot easier to do it yourself. Honestly, like if you can do an input that is like z binary or whatever, like, and you can then get like a stream in your mutation and then stream that up to S3. You don't have to do that extra round trip to get a pre-send URL and stuff like that. And it's a lot easier whenever, for me, like my experience is just like whenever you can shift logic, any sort of logic from the front end to the back end, it's a good thing. And if we can support other content types, shifting that logic to the backend would make sense.
A bunch of people are redeeming find a cat. I have one right here. Cat is next to me. We're interviewing him. Well, yeah, that's a unexpected but really good answer. I'm super happy I asked the question. I totally agree. Like, if you can make it elegant, that's really powerful. But I personally don't see a reason to upload on my server. Like the one back and forth is a lot easier than eating all of the data going into your, especially in like serverless land. Like eating that data transfer when you don't have to is not within my interests personally. But it's really interesting to hear from your side.
I mean, you do HD video streaming. You pay for that. You can also pay for a few file uploads here and there, I think.
Fair. We're not doing the file streaming on our servers either, though, for that reason.
No. But the file streaming could be like, instead of sending that pre-send URL, you can have a mutation and then you stream it from that mutation up to S3, and then you can cut some logic. And cutting logic means cutting man hours, and cutting man hours has more impact on your costs than saving a few pennies on your data transfer.
I have seen this one come up enough times. I want to jump on it. What's the difference between gRPC and tRPC, Alex?
gRPC is something completely different. So like RPC was a thing before tRPC, before gRPC. And gRPC is a big project by Google where you work with a binary protocol, and you have strictly defined data shapes that are guaranteed on your server, and you can pass data around microservices or from front end to back end or whatever in really performant ways. But RPC just means remote procedure call. And remote procedure call is an ancient way of doing APIs where you sort of like mimic being in a system even though you're outside of the boundaries of that system, and you just call functions. That is what RPC is in simple terms.
Somebody in chat said Google RPC versus true RPC.
You could put it like that. Like Google RPC requires a lot more wiring than tRPC, but it's also way more performant. So I mean, I think this is a pretty good segue to the GraphQL tRPC discussion, actually, because that's also like
one more one I want to jump on. Somebody asked if you can encrypt the tRPC response and unencrypt it in the client. Yeah, SSL is really cool.
Yeah, that's what SSL is for, right?
Yep, just wanted to jump on that.
You don't deal with that yourself. Like you have a provider that can give you encryption. Fuck dealing with that yourself.
Totally agree. Anyways, GraphQL. Why should I never use GraphQL again?
You probably should. That's my answer. Like, a lot of people ask, what's the benefits of tRPC over GraphQL or vice versa? And what I usually say, and what's in the tRPC docs already, is sort of like, if you're already using GraphQL, you're happy. You have a big organization around it. Don't change. But GraphQL, for me, I've used it happily in production for several years before creating tRPC. So I don't. For me, it's, I don't know how to put it. Like, I would never badmouth GraphQL in any shape or form. But the fact is, tRPC allows you to move quicker, especially at a small scale. like small organization. And I feel like GraphQL is really, really good at solving organizational problems as a language, where you can have like this beautiful graph, this beautiful domain layer of all of your data in your organization, and there's one unified way that is really strict on how you query that data. If you're a startup, if you're a smaller company, typically what you actually want to do is sort of like query something, show something. And tRPC is a lot faster way of doing that. And I'm not only talking fast in terms of like development speed, it's also more performant. GraphQL, especially if you talk about Node.js, is slow. Like if you ever tried to return a big payload, we're talking like a megabyte of JSON in GraphQL, it gets really, really slow because of the type checking that it has to do at runtime on every single node in your graph.
Totally agree. The way I like to frame it is GraphQL solves a communication problem, tRPC solves a DX problem. Both look similar in the sense that they're a definition of your API that is much easier to work with in a type safe way on your client, but the approach is so fundamentally different that it feels like they solve two different problems. Like if I have a big backend team and a big front end team and they're constantly stepping on each other's toes and there's no way for them to like interop and work together, GraphQL is a schema that they use now as the communication method between the teams that also works in code. tRPC lets you flatten all of that into one code base where you don't think as much about it. And it's a matter of, do you want to think more about the shape of your APIs or do you want to never think about it again? tRPC is,
exactly.
I don't want to think about it. GraphQL is, I want to think about it so my teams don't have to talk as much.
Yeah. At my job, since we work with tRPC, we've actually never had a conversation about API shapes. We never had a conversation about like, this is the shape of our data when we return it from our API. There's no spec with like, this is how you return a list. This is how you return a function. An entity. This is how you return related data to that entity. It's just like you call a function, you return whatever the fuck you want based on the needs of that specific page. And everyone is a full stack developer. Like we try to not have that distinction. Like obviously some people are stronger one than the other, but your job as an engineer is not to build APIs or backend things or buttons on the front end. Your job is to solve business needs. And that is the sort of framing. Like tRPC is a full stack framework. And it's also like one thing rather than like in GraphQL, you might have to have like 4 or 5 packages with sub dependencies. And it solves the layer between front and the back end and sort of, fizzles out like what is front end, what is back end. You don't have that clear distinction anymore. But as an organization scale, you might see at some point where tRPC doesn't really solve these communication problems anymore. You already have moved into silos, and GraphQL might solve those problems for you. And when that day comes, or if that day comes, you can probably just like copy pasta all of the procedure logic that you have in tRPC in a beautiful graph instead, and it'll be pretty good to go.
Sorry, responding to chat messages. Mostly, yeah, I entirely agree with this. I think I'm seen as anti-GraphQL now a bit, which is sad because I'm very pro-GraphQL. I'm just anti-GraphQL being prescribed for the wrong things. The same way I'm against Next being used for static sites if it's avoidable. Like there are better tools for certain things, and GraphQL, the front-end DX, does not have to also be GraphQL, the full stack backend hell. AJ from the Redwood project brought up a quote around or along the lines of, do I think that, or somebody else actually asked it, do I think that GraphQL is just pushing the problem to the backend? Because GraphQL on the backend is a decent bit more work than a traditional REST endpoint where you just dump data. I would like your thoughts first,
But
because I
is it?
definitely have a bunch myself.
I mean, there's a lot of, I work with backend engineers that thinks that's the case, and I worked as a backend engineer, and I don't think that's the case, because GraphQL allows you to do, one endpoint or one resolver that fulfills a lot of different needs. So you write it once, and then the clients can use it how they want. So I don't think so. And all of those sort of like scaling problems, whatever, with GraphQL, that sort of shit, you have to solve anyway, but it's a different take of the same problem. And that problem is a bit more loosely defined and a bit more unfamiliar to people. Like, there are a lot of things you have to like buy into when you go for GraphQL. You have to think about query complexity. You have to think about field-based authorization and authentication and stuff like that. That in REST or sort of REST and RPC land is sort of similar in that way. You don't have to think about that as much. You just think like, does this user have access to this endpoint, rather than does this user have access to this field? And that's a bit of a problem that is easier to grasp. But at the end of the day, you need to solve both anyway. So I don't really agree that GraphQL is more work than REST. Also, it gives you a lot of shit that REST doesn't give you. Like, you can rename stuff. You can deprecate things of the API. You can introspect what is actually used in your API, and a lot of really cool introspection features. But yeah, I would love to hear your take on this. I
Yeah,
can
I don't
ramble
think I
about this for
agree
a
on
while.
this one. I think that doing GraphQL isn't inherently more work than REST or RPC. Doing GraphQL correctly is very much a lot of work, and you need someone who's incredibly familiar with it and its strengths and weaknesses to pull that off right. As someone mentioned in the chat, my take is like GraphQL is great if you have a GraphQL god at your company to do it right and push it the correct ways. But if you don't have someone experienced with GraphQL, that is a really the worst way to pick up the GraphQL experience is when you already have a communication problem you're using GraphQL to solve. Like, learning GQL to solve an external communication problem is doing two hard things at once in a way that's likely going to doom you. And I very much agree there. Similar to like, and this is why Tanner still blows me away. The worst way to learn TypeScript is building a library. Like, the best way to learn TypeScript is building an app where all the libraries are well typed already, and you're just inferring the type off the thing that you're calling. And the most complex thing you ever have to do is install an @type/ package once. And library maintainer land, as you know better than anyone, the TypeScript you have to write is very different from the TypeScript most of chat here has to write. And I have recently adopted the take that one of the biggest reasons TypeScript is such a pleasant application development experience is because it's offloaded that work to library developers. It has required developers like you, like Tanner, like the core React team, to build type definitions such that we as consumers of those libraries and users of TypeScript can have a better experience developing software. I think GraphQL does the same thing to the backend developers, but on a smaller company scale, which is why it's less. I guess both are pretty invisible problems, but I think there's a lot of similarity there.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. And on one note on what you said, like, don't write the sort of generic shit that you can see if you dive into the tRPC or React query or whatever open source project you find in TypeScript land. Don't fucking write that in the application code. Like, generics, I mean, some generics might belong in application code, but the sort of advanced shit you do should be offloaded into libraries. I think you strongly agree on that note.
Couldn't
So
agree more. The simpler your application logic can be, the better. I think we have 5 custom type defs in the entire Ping code base, and most of them are because of nextauth.
Yeah. And just like learn inference. Like if you want to level up your TypeScript skills, there's like learn how to leverage inference. Like if you have a ZOD schema, you don't have to rewrite the interface of those types. Learn how to infer the types from a ZOD schema. Like let the ZOD schema be your point of truth, and then infer those types elsewhere, and learn how to mix and matching types from different things. A really nice thing about ZOD is that it maps really nice to TypeScript, right? Like all of the features in ZOD maps really well to how TypeScript works. So yeah, but on the GraphQL question, did anyone have any like more questions on that subject? Or did we exhaust that?
There's a slight tangent within of why would I use tRPC instead of Redwood or Blitz.js, in the sense that like Redwood's a full stack provided GraphQL solution, and Blitz is more similar to the tRPC style of like RPC patterns. But I did see one Matt comment I want to call out, that he somewhat disagrees with like the don't write advanced TypeScript in your client code, not because what you're saying is wrong, but because you have a different definition of advanced TypeScript from me, and I have a different one from most of the community here. There is a level of like using some generics to make like a reused, like use Supabase hook slightly easier to maintain in your code base, and you don't have to go as advanced with like the chaos that you're doing to get a little more from TypeScript. And that's a lot of what like Matt's materials and like the TypeScript. I think it's like I forgot the thing I saw Trash doing yesterday on stream, Matt. If you could name that and link it. I think you built a like tutorial game series thing where you play with different like harder TypeScript challenges.
Yeah, I've seen that TypeScript challenges thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I should retract a bit from my statement earlier. Like, yeah, don't be scared of generics and having them in the application code. But I would slightly disagree still with Matt's take. Like, I don't think like, if you have a generic that is remapping stuff in TypeScript, I don't really think that belongs too much in application code. But yeah, I mean, there's differences of opinion, right? Like I can comfortably write that. So my take there is sort of like, yeah, I can comfortably read and write that myself, but it sort of what you said about GraphQL too. Like then you need a TypeScript god in your team, and if that TypeScript god leaves, who's going to maintain that stuff?
Somebody link this in chat as an example of a TypeScript god.
Yeah,
this is
chaos.
crazy
stuff. This should be simplified, but it does its job. But it should be. I have a task to rewrite this to be a bit more simple. But this is the sort of like procedure builder that you see, where you can add dot input, and then when you call a resolve function after that, you get a typed input type based on that. But yeah, it's using the builder pattern, which is really nice. I saw Matt mentioning that on Twitter yesterday. It's really powerful.
Matt just made one actually very good point about the TypeScript god thing. If your GraphQL god leaves, the service rots. If your TypeScript god leaves, you add a bunch of any's.
No any's in application code. No any's, please.
I'm with you, but when you don't have a TypeScript god anymore, people make compromises, and you can work with any more easily than you can work with a breaking GraphQL service that nobody knows how to maintain.
Fair. I mean, neither is good.
Yes.
Let's just leave it as that, right? Like, I think that it's a bit of an unfair comparison because it's two very different problems, right? But neither is good, and you shouldn't depend on the one god in your team to maintain your code base. So if you can write code that anyone in your team can maintain, that's a good thing. Like, try to write code that someone else can jump into and fix. Like, ideally, you shouldn't be able to read the code and know who wrote it. That's good development practice to me.
Totally agree. And this is why I like use the prettier stock config. It's why I love tRPC. I still remember the moment where I was like showing the ping code base to like a friend slash investor, Dax, way back. I remember like when I was just showing him one of the tRPC router files, just I think it was like our like room router in ping for like managing a call. And he just looks, he's like, wait, isn't this a TypeScript file? Where's the TypeScript? And I realized there wasn't a single type definition in my entire like 400 line tRPC router with all of my procedures for managing calls, because it was all inferred off of the actual function calls and values in there. There wasn't a single as, there wasn't a single like colon type def. It all inferred from what I wrote. It was just JavaScript, and you didn't have to be a TypeScript god or even TypeScript aware to work in that and benefit from it. And if you get a red squiggly line, that's not because your TypeScript is wrong. That's because your code is wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the power of inference, right? Which you shouldn't do, according to the docs.
I might have to make that either a title of a clip from this or just my next video, the power of inference. So, with that now thoroughly exhausted, let's get into the Blitz and Redwood convo for a little bit, because I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, Redwood, use it with tRPC. Simple as that. It works well with tRPC. There's several Redwood users that uses tRPCs with Redwood, and that's my thoughts on that. If you like, I think Redwood is built for massive scale, and the GraphQL element of it is something you might not need in the beginning, so you can use tRPC with it. And on the Blitz conversation is that Blitz, as the way everyone knows Blitz, doesn't exist anymore, or it's changing to being something more similar to the combo of next off plus next plus tRPC, but it's still in alpha, and their RPC layer is a lot less powerful than tRPC, a lot less customizable, and is tied to a build tool. So you can't just like infer stuff from or import stuff from your server, from your client, without having a pretty complicated build chain in there. And the abstraction on the backend in order to how you build out your backend is not really a framework. It's more like bare bones, if you will.
Yes, I totally agree. And for context for the audience, Blitz is a huge part of why I made Create T3 app, because I do like the idea of, hey, this thing is good, or like, how do I put it? The power of full stack type safety is really powerful, and the ability to set it up quickly is super valuable as well. For something to not be so tied to your specific build tools, you have to use something like tRPC. But in order for that to work without really heavy build steps and compiler type stuff, there has to be a bit of boilerplate involved, like the inference helpers, the proxy object now, and these pieces have to be assembled to get around the build side. And the goal of Create T3 app was specifically to bridge that gap, to give you the elegant getting started DX of Blitz without compromising on the modularity and the lack of assumptions around build time that something like Blitz had to make around. Like Blitz is a top to bottom way to build an app. Create T3 app is a suggestion on how to assemble it yourself, with some of the annoying bridges between those parts assembled.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if you want to use the Blitz RPC layer in React Native, for instance, you don't get any types. And I don't know how far along they are to get to that point, but once they are there, it's going to involve a pretty complicated build pipeline. That's probably going to be as hairy, if not hairier, to set up than it is to set up these like 2 files in tRPC that you can copy paste in from the docs. I mean, in tRPC, it's going to be two things you set up on your server. You set up the T object, and you do that by calling init.init.trpc. And on the front end, you set up the React query hooks, which is one function. And then apart from that, you also need the API handler.
But you also have to like wrap the React app with the context. You have to put in the API handler, and you have to understand the relationship between those parts. And I think this is something that I have a slight disagreement with you on. To go back to the V10 doc that you shared before, I think you aren't doing this as badly as you were prior, but it felt like, oh yeah, you fixed my complaint. Fuck yes. Never mind. Yeah. So for context for everyone else, the original version of this V10 doc had a full stack example at the top. Like, it wasn't just the playground link. It was like, here's everything to create the backend and here's everything to create the front end. But the majority of my day-to-day building in tRPC isn't the way it plugs in on those sides. It's very specifically how I define a procedure in the sense of a query or a mutation, and then how I hit that on the client. And this new version of the doc immediately shows old, here's how you defined a router, new, here's how you define a router now, and then here's how you would call in like the vanilla client in React, here's how you call it now. I am much happier with this. It's much clearer. Here's how things changed. And previously your comment was, it felt like doing this was hiding things because we're just showing the parts that are good. I didn't think of it that way. I felt like this isn't hiding the parts that are hard in the boilerplate. Rather, this is highlighting the things that you actually are going to work with every day when you use it.
Yeah, I think you're right. So yeah, I added those. It took 5 minutes. So I think that was a good shout. And I mean, this doc is sort of like gonna lay the foundation of whatever like migration post or introductory blog post about V10 is gonna be. So I'm really happy for any feedback on this document as well.
We should probably plan a formal like V10 launch like event with a stream and a video, get some people to come on and talk about how tRPCs change things for them and shit. Like, we should make this a thing.
Yeah, fuck yeah. Yeah, I'd love that. Also, we're gonna do a new website that's in the works.
Well, there are at least like 600 people who are vaguely web developers watching between Twitch and YouTube right now. So is there anything in particular you want them to put eyes on, potentially contribute to, help with? A link I could share here that would be helpful. tRPC Discord, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, the tRPC Discord for sure. And there's a bunch of issues that I've outlined that are like, good for first, good for newcomers, so good first issue. I'll send that. Maybe that's a good thing to look at if someone is curious about helping out tRPC. And I realize now there's only 7 things there. Good first issue, which is bad. But if someone wants to contribute to tRPC in any shape or form, my Twitter handle is twitter.com/alex.js.
I actually have a command on the Twitch chat, !KATT, KATT, to get the link to his Twitter.
Okay, cool. So that's yeah. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done on tRPC. Like, if anyone wants to help out formatting the docs in a nicer way, we probably want an API reference thing on the docs that is not just like these guided sections. It can be a lot better structured, the whole documentation side. Sachin has done really good work on the foundation of that. If someone wants to help out with that, if someone has design skills on this stream, Someone wants to do a new logo for tRPC, give me a proper palette to work with on the colors. Want to do some really cool example projects on the front page of tRPC, GIFs, videos, whatnot. There's so much things we can do. Like when I dive into tRPC, whenever I have time, it's mostly about like diving straight into the code, enable new features. So I the things about like documentations and stuff is stuff I pick up later, and therefore they are lacking in a lot of places. There's dark spots, but yeah, if you want to help out, join the tRPC IO Discord, and write a message in the contributing channel, and I'll happily guide you in any way you want.
Super exciting
If I
stuff.
can help you, help you. If I can help you, help me. That'd be great.
I can say just from my experience, the quality of the contributions from the community here has been surreal. I'll get a screen share once more because I have one particular number I'm really proud of. On Create T3 app, we have 42 contributors. Insane.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So cool
I
for a
mean,
project
that's
this new.
almost on. Yeah, that's sort of like close to on par with tRPC. Like super cool.
Yeah, I was floored. To be fair, there are more low-hanging fruit in a CLI to init an app than there are in something like tRPC, but there's still so much work to be done in both. And it's really cool to see how like the community isn't just here to like shit post and learn like I am. They're here to do a lot more. And unlike me, who kind of just sits and shit posts until other people do the work, the people here are actually willing to do the work. So shout out to the whole community. If y'all want to take what you've learned from here and both hear the stream, but also hear Create T3 app and use that to make tRPC better, you have a great opportunity right now.
Yeah, just ask me.
I also saw Matt trying to sell out my job to somebody else. I am the tRPC dev advocate. Don't give away my role.
Yeah. And yeah, please also get Sachin some new followers.
Yeah, Sachin deserves a huge shout out.
Yeah, please follow this guy.
I will.
Sachin has been instrumental in helping out with tRPC since he got started to get involved. I don't know when it was, like 8 months ago or something. Yeah, give him a follow.
Yeah, I just spam Sachin's link. Quick side rant on the topic of Sachin. This is something like a pattern I've been seeing more and more commonly in the software and open source space. I feel like there are more and more developers like Sachin, like TK Dodo, like the handful of incredible people in our community. Shout out like Julius and Nexel, who are, I don't know how to put it other than they see this thing that's working, they see the opportunity to improve it, and just accelerate that thing so hard. Like the work that TK's done to make everything in React Query Land so much more accessible and so much more powerful. The work that someone like Sachin's doing to make V10 possible. The work that Daishi is doing in Poimanders to keep Zustand moving while also working on Jodi, Valtio, and Select from Context and like 15 other libraries now. I think that these like second level open source devs, it's like kind of the artist favorite artist effect, but it's like there's this layer right below the big name open source maintainers that you're more on that side now, where you're like the name that talks about the thing that comes on the show that does the stuff, but there's that really important support layer right next to you that makes this all possible. And I just want to shout those people out more because I don't think they get enough love.
Yeah. I feel that's strongly about that with like TK Dodo. Like everyone knows Tanner, and TK Dodo does the bulk of the work right now on React Query, and he deserves a lot more love and following than he does, even though he gets a lot. Like he's not a unknown person either. but yes, Sachin has been really good help for me. Both ways, having someone you can spitball ideas with that is like very familiar with the code base. And also like he does quality contributions as well on his own accord and helps me with the API design decisions. Yeah, it's really, really, really instrumental to have a right-hand man.
Couldn't agree more. And it's like, I think a lot about burnout because it's something I'm lucky enough to not run into a whole lot. But also, like, I'm betting on things made by individuals that could burn out, and figuring out which projects will and won't and how they're thinking about themselves, their own work, and their own contributions is so important. Like, the first time I had a sit down chat with Jared before it was even like a thing we did on stream about Bun, all I pushed with him is, how do you parallelize yourself? 90 hours a week is not going to be sustainable for a project that you have to lead and build. What does parallelizing this look like, and how do we get there? And I think that you've not only figured that out early, but addressed it very effectively with contributors like Sachin, and hopefully even more people from the stream here. I actually like started from that point. I knew I couldn't build or maintain Create T3 app. I had a vague idea of what it could look like, but I didn't want to do that because I would burn out on it super hard, and a bunch of people would be stuck on this template that I'm not going to help with. But with developers like all the people we're talking about now, that's how these projects can build an audience and not hurt that audience when the creators inevitably don't have the focus to keep working on it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've definitely felt fatigue with tRPC. Like, I always wanted to be 10 steps ahead of where it is, and some days it's just like, ah, fuck it, I can't be asked to do anything, and it's just so cool to like you jump into Discord a day or two after, or like GitHub, and like the questions that people are popping all over the place now are getting answered without some people I never heard of before are answering really eloquently on advanced topics on GitHub discussions or on the Discord, and it's really, really gratifying to see like the sort of community coming to life without. I don't feel like I've done any sort of community building.
One more thing I want to show you on that topic, like I've done a bit more community building, but one of my favorite moments in a similar aspect, because I've totally seen the same thing in my community where I've been very impressed with how well my community understands the things that we talk about here, to the point where they can answer questions better than I can, sometimes even my questions. So when I first used Create T3 app, I was blown away. It made it way quicker for me to start an app. And for me, the only thing that was missing was Prettier. And I wanted Prettier because I use Prettier on all my things. And Nexel immediately replied, we could have a config, but I think that might be too opinionated. I personally just use the default. If someone wants Prettier, they can install, configure it themselves. Yeah, it's just an npm install. There's no reason to include that in our template if you can just npm install it yourself and it does the right thing. The thing that this exists for is the stuff you can't just npm install, the things that have like interoperation, like, and relationships, like next auth and Prisma and tRPC have a relationship you have to define that you have to understand well enough to define. Putting that in the template makes a ton of sense. Putting Prettier there when you can just go install it if you want it doesn't. And it was surreal to have my own philosophy thrown at me in a way that's like, yeah, you're right, I shouldn't do this. Then I close my own issue. Well, he closed it for me.
Yeah, that's really cool. Also, like, yeah, it's really cool to see how this project has blown up over the last few weeks. It's amazing.
Yeah, the power of YouTube and Twitch.
Yeah. Also, one thing I've been thinking about on this thing as well. Oh, while we're on the subject of this, sorry for the tangent, is that right now we have Create T3 app is amazing. There's a bunch of examples as well on the tRPC website, but there's no tool that makes the migration to tRPC good. Like it's sort of like, okay, you used create T3 app once when you start a project, but if you already have a really complicated project set up and you want to like try out tRPC, if someone on the stream is listening from that project, if you want to tackle a hard problem, that would be to like, if you can interactively add all the T3 stuff on an existing Next app in an easy way, that'd be sick.
There's an issue for this. Somebody's been working on it pretty hard. I think it's Ochek, if I recall, has been deep in it. He said something along the lines of like, this has been keeping me up at night. Yeah, I've dreamed about this, and like went really in detail on like how this could work with like the different code mod techniques and such. So there are people thinking about this who theoretically could make it work, but it is difficult and I would say out of scope of Create T3 app, but it is absolutely something worth looking into.
Because that sort of stuff can enable Create T3 app to be more than just something you use once at the beginning of the project. Like, I think that if you want to add in your recipes or whatever, like.
Yeah, I think that these are two different projects, but this is the right starting point to do what you're describing. I think having a good, simple, focused, here's how you start a new app from scratch using this tech is a missing piece that we've seen things like Blitz and Redwood keep being created to address. I want to make, I hate to put it this way, but I want to make it feel a little bad to use Blitz. Not in the sense that Blitz is bad tech, but in the sense that you're choosing to give up ownership of those parts. And when you make the choice to use Blitz, you should feel a little bad that you're giving up control in favor of everything being like handled externally. Versus Create T3 app, it's initting things for the best start that you now own. And I really like that role of this particular project, but there's absolutely a hole in what you're describing for a CLI that interactively adds pieces, makes suggestions, all of those types of things. I personally think that the example stuff is much better overall. And my personal goal for like the direction of Create T3 app is less like more CLI tools, much more guides, resources, links to kitchen sink. Like more than half of the issues that people have brought up in like Discord asking about Create T3 app, I have resolved by replying with links to kitchen sink and to tRPC docs, and having a good documentation set such that it brings you to the right places and to the right examples when you run into those problems is very exciting. Also, AJ is in chat. He's deep in working on a guide, like a written doc on how to start with and use Create T3 app and this stack, which is crazy because he comes from the Redwood world, but is very excited by what we're doing here. He linked the issue, actually.
I don't really see them as competitors, right? Either. It's just Redwood is one of those things where you get a full table set out for you, and T3 sort of like, here's all of the ingredients in a bit more unstructured way, and you can cherry pick what you want, and yeah.
Just linking to tRPC kitchen sinks, people were asking about it. Yeah, I definitely agree that
there's not much stuff there yet.
I did a bit of a rant on this. Actually, this might be a good final thing for me to get your thoughts on, because I know it's really late there for you. But a talk I'm planning on giving soon that I've been like sketching out is buying time. The idea that when you make these types of technical decisions, you're buying yourself some amount of time until you have to change that decision. And that time is like a cost, and the cost is in three pieces. There's how much does it cost to adopt this thing, how much does it cost to maintain using this thing, and how much does it cost to move off this thing in the future. And I was trying to chart like different solutions where tRPC has a slightly higher cost to adopt because you have to understand the boilerplate enough to set it up. The goal of Create T3 app was to reduce the cost to initially set things up. And with tRPC and with Create T3 app as well, I firmly believe that the cost of using them once set up is pretty much flat. You're not eating much when you do that. Where with GraphQL, you do have to understand GraphQL well enough to eat that cost. So what I've like diagrammed here is Redwood is a decision that will be more expensive to work with on the day-to-day, but you can get to a way larger team size with it than you could with tRPC and Create T3 app in its current state. Whereas if you rolled your own GraphQL, you can go a lot further, but you get to a point where the cost to move off it is unrealistic.
Yeah, I like your framing here. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know where the employee count stops for tRPC, because I know for a fact there's a lot bigger organizations that use tRPC than 100. There's a few unicorns that are using it. So
I should say rather than employee, like number, wrong keyboard, number of regular contributors to code base using X. So like,
yeah, it's
do you know a company that has over 100 people contributing to a code base that heavily uses tRPC?
I don't know if there's, I would assume so, but I don't know for a fact. I'll have to ask.
No worries. Yeah, I'm very curious because I want like I am giving this talk, I think in 2-ish weeks. I booked something. I need to get better at calendars and dates in general, but my goal is to like meaningfully communicate when you make a technical decision, how do you calculate the cost around it? And I think that I like this framing of comparing it against the number of people at the company, because if you have a 4-person company, or one step back, I used to have time on the bottom, like how many years is this decision going to last you? And that didn't feel right. So I switched over to number of users, but like tRPC scales better than GraphQL does just by like infra side because it's so simple. So I kept thinking it's like, oh, it's the number of people contributing to this because that represents like the size of the code base, the amount of money the company's making, the amount of time it's existed for. Like all of those are, if all is going in a way that it would affect the performance of these solutions, it's probably affecting the number of engineers working on that code as well.
Yeah.
But I'm up for suggestions for this axis.
Just to, drum a bit on Sachin a bit again, he's working on some really cool stuff that can extend this a lot in terms of maintainability over time. He's working on a thing that can give you a bit more guarantee of and more confidence in terms of the outputs of your procedures. So one of the big issues or big challenges with tRPC right now, which is also one of the superpowers, is that there's no, all of the information about what something returns is just there at build time. You can't just like review a tRPC. You can't just review a backend, a pull request, and see that, okay, changing these things in your services will change the output of this query in this way. So it's quite, it becomes a problem where you might actually leak some information that you don't want to leak in a particular place. So Sachin is working on a CLI tool, actually, that could potentially auto-generate the sort of like TypeScript that is returned on each procedure. So you'll get an actual output validator, but you don't have to write that output validator yourself, which is the big superpower of it.
I've wanted this for so long, is specifically Jake at Railway. This was his biggest pushback on tRPC, and he's starting to come around to it more. I think this will push him over the edge. Also, peace, Matt. Thanks for stopping by. I'm really excited that that's coming. That reminded me one other thing I definitely want to bring up because it's super exciting and new, and people ask a lot about it. Sorry, not Jacob Cloudford, Jake at Railway. My bad, Jacob. But the OpenAPI stuff. I saw that there's a package floating around now, the tRPC OpenAPI generator. I don't quite know how it works, but effectively it lets you use your tRPC procedures in a traditional OpenAPI REST workflow. Yeah,
exactly. So that's one of the other core contributors, James, that's been working on that. And it allows you to build an OpenAPI spec based on your tRPC backend, you can jump to that. I think code explains it better. And the only thing you need to really define extra from what you do normally is that you also have to define an output schema in order to describe. You need to add a few extra meta fields, like where does this endpoint actually live in the OpenAPI spec, and what is the output of that, so the OpenAPI schema can know what is going to come out of it. But then after that, you just get an OpenAPI spec that you can use in other languages, which is pretty powerful. But if we then combine this with the work that Sachin is doing, we can actually automatically create the OpenAPI schema just by writing TypeScript.
Very exciting.
Because then you have all the information needed to generate the OpenAPI schema. You have the input shape, you have the output shape, you have the name of it. You'll just have to say like, okay, this should be accessed at users/ID, and it should be requested by a GET, and then you can get an OpenAPI spec from it.
Really exciting. I'm a little concerned about how much you have to put in meta for this to work, but if you've as a team decided to do that, this could be very valuable.
Yeah. I mean, it's for people that don't use TypeScript on both ends. That's the way I see it. Or if you want to do a public-facing API. But we'll work towards a point where it's as little as humanly possible for you to define manually.
Very interesting. I have to think more on this one. I haven't played with this too much. Right now, when I have the rare occasion I need a public endpoint or something else, I take the function I wrote into your PC, I call it in a new endpoint file in Next, and now that's a public endpoint. But the ability to opt in certain routes to become OpenAPI and then generate a doc and everything for it, very exciting stuff.
Yeah, if you already do it, take this for a spin. And James is very open for feedback too.
Really good stuff. I'm hyped. I'll share this link in chat once more for anybody who wants to possibly play with tRPC as a solution for more non-TypeScripty spaces as well. All fantastic stuff. Thank you again so much for stopping by and taking the time, especially on such last minute notice. For those who don't know, I had a cancellation super late or super unexpected yesterday, so I had to fill the slot. I've owed Alex a chat about V10 for a minute, and he jumped on top of this super quick. So thank you so much again, man. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you want to touch on?
No, I think we're good. Yeah, it's really fun, like as always. I like my conversations with you, and it doesn't happen often enough because of the time differences. And when we do, we might as well just do it on a stream because it might be interesting for other people.
Totally agree. And I can tell by the 600 people who are still chilling watching that this was a very interesting conversation. Having this many people this late is huge. So thank you again for stopping by and taking the time. Everybody here, if you're not already following Alex, please fix that. Alex.js on Twitter. I spammed his link. I'll spam it once more here. Please help him however you can. Be involved. Join the Discord. When can people expect V10 is a question I am seeing. Do you have a timeline in your mind right now?
I think we're gonna do a more public alpha, in a few weeks. And I mean, the public alpha, it's already stable, right? Like, I've already proven it works with my own company's code, with all the test examples and stuff. And if you're eager to play with tRPC V10, just do it now. There might be some slight API changes before it's proper V10, but going from alpha to beta to release candidate to major is just because I don't want to do breaking API changes. It works. It's stable if you want to use it today.
Good shit.
So that's not a clear answer, but hopefully, like, before the end of summer.
I was planning on possibly doing, and I don't get chat too excited, but fuck it. I was thinking about doing a code stream after this, where I was going to build a full stack app for the first time in a while. Do I use V10?
100% yes. Yeah. Just use that SQLite starter as a starting point.
Oh no, we're using
It's
Create T3 app
basically
as the starter, to be clear. Like Create T3 app is the only way we start apps on this channel now. But I will be porting the Create
okay.
T3 app template that it generates over to be V10 compatible.
Yeah, that should be like 10 minutes of your stream, so that's easy.
Well, considering that Create T3 app's taken the first hour of my code streams and eradicated them, trading that for 10 minutes of tRPC sounds fine.
All good to me.
Good stuff. Well, thank you again so much for stopping by, man. I can't wait for this to all ship. We're going to go play a whole bunch with the code now that we can. And yeah, thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Peace, man.